Thank you for the kind introduction. Everybody can hear me okay? Awesome. All right, so, yeah, today what I came to speak about are, I'll call it an important lesson learned, or maybe it's a couple lessons learned from this project that now has been going on for 8 years, I think, or something like that. It's getting to be difficult to keep track. But we've invested in some interesting areas that fall into this legal entity-driven, outside-in, bottom-up discovery that I've been sharing with the community because I think it brought light to some techniques that people didn't realize were so achievable, and they could be doing this themselves if they wanted to. So I guess I don't need to cover this since I had such a nice introduction. But I guess if you want socials, you want to follow up, you want to talk, there's some socials down there. You can reach me pretty easily at Discord, LinkedIn, things like that. I don't know if, this would be a good point, I suppose, to say, well, how many people here know what Amass is or have ever used it before? All right, so I see less than 5 hands, so probably a good time to say, well, what is this? What is this all about? So, yes, I started my career doing offensive cyber warfare research and development. In that world, I would say, situational awareness was not an option. You had to understand the battle space. You had to understand what you were deploying. You had to understand what risks were attached to those doing that. So I guess you could say I was spoiled. I was used to that because that was how I started my career. When I left that world and joined the commercial world, I came with the assumption that that's how things would operate and with commercial organizations as well. What a mistake. Because almost every organization I helped support, when it got to that part of the conversation where it was, okay, so what do you have deployed? What different products are those? What are they for? What are the risks attached? People started looking at me like I was nuts for asking these things and couldn't answer my questions, and usually said we'd have to wait a week to get the information from someone else. Which is where I started pinching myself. Like, what do you mean? How are you making security decisions when you don't even know what you're protecting or what is out there in the first place? But that continued to be the pattern as I went from one commercial company to another. Even ones that had mature, well-funded programs, or quote-unquote mature, well-funded programs, it was the same. Actually, it only got worse usually because those were larger organizations with a larger footprint, hence a larger problem for them to keep their arms wrapped around. So instead of just kind of being shocked by this and then I guess shrugging my shoulders and moving on, I guess I felt the need to maybe show everyone how big of a problem it was that they didn't have appropriate visibility on their attack surface. That's what gave life to the Amass project. We created the project to create a completely automated turnkey solution that would allow anyone, not just companies, the point was to enlighten these companies, right? Wake them up and help them realize what they need to be doing. But it also gave this capability to everybody. So I guess you could say it was kind of a way of saying, well, you better start thinking about it because I just made it easy for everybody to do this. So you better do it too. And start paying attention to what you look like through the lens of the attacker, the adversary, what have you. So that's the context here. That's what we created 8 years ago or so. It seems to have been a pretty good, a successful project. A lot of people using this now. I've even seen it show up in some job recs and things like that. So it's come a long way. We've also had millions of dollars of support thrown at this project to take it from the tool it once was to the framework it is today. So it's been quite a journey. And part of that is we've been looking into some interesting things. So, like many discovery capabilities, so Amass has to find assets on the internet, right? That's part of what it does, is it finds your exposure, it finds what you have on the internet. Most organizations that are doing this, like for instance, if you are working with a company that claims to provide an ASM service, there's a good chance that they're doing this, and they're doing top-down discovery, which is where they're starting with namespaces and they're moving their way to network infrastructure such as your numbers, I'll call it, right? But the classic problem with this, right, is what if they don't tell you all these namespaces, right? Or what if you miss some? Or what if some of the assets don't have public DNS names, right? These are all interesting problems that present themselves when you're only looking through that lens, or you're depending on these DNS names to give you awareness of the public reachability of these assets. So some companies have said, well, we will also incorporate bottom-up discovery, where we are not assuming what namespaces are being used. We will start from the networks that we know they have, or where they're present, and then just look at all the IP addresses and see which IP addresses have actual systems responding on them. And therefore, we know there's something there listening, and we need to figure out what it is. Most companies that have a really effective program around this do both of these, right? Where they meet in the middle, so to speak, with the top-down and the bottom-up discovery. But actually, I would say, once you've heard me talk about this, keep your ears open for how many companies actually say they do bottom-up discovery. It'll be a far lower number than you probably think. It's a typically expensive thing to implement effectively, because in order to do this without creating tons of noise on the internet, you have to have a very, let's just to keep it simple, a very expensive infrastructure built around this that is designed to keep this as quiet as possible, or not create unwanted attention to your activities. And even then, I would say, if you have the infrastructure, you still need the right personnel that know how to use it correctly to achieve what I'm talking about here. So from a corporate perspective, this is a annoying thing to have to deal with, because it's dependent on the right personnel, which of course is not a good dependency to be having. And like I said, it requires quite an investment to set this all up. I've only ever dealt with a handful of companies really that have made an honest attempt to do this properly. And like I said, even then, it's something they see as potentially high risk to the product or whatever they're selling. But it's unfortunate that this is the case, because the bottom-up discovery is quite effective at finding these other assets I was talking about, especially if a company, like I said, is setting up the asset and then saying, well, only we need to use the DNS names, so we'll keep them private. We won't make them public DNS names. We'll just put it out there on the IP, and most people won't realize it's there, or have a way to reach it, or any way to resolve to this asset. And so a lot of people won't find it. But what if you can? What if you do have bottom-up discovery and you can discover these additional assets? It helps you, for instance, find interesting things such as if you have a large organization and they have different office buildings all over the place, this is a pretty easy way to then find all of these different office buildings and through the ISPs that they have, giving them, say, one IP per building. Whereas like their corporate, or the building that has IT would have probably a larger on-prem infrastructure than that, but these other ones are still connected and they need to be on the internet. It's possible to find them when you have this type of capability, whereas top-down's not going to find that for you. That's just one example. So hopefully that's enough context around, well, what is this? Why would you want it? Why is it worth listening to the rest of what I have to say? I don't think I missed anything. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can see in the bullet, it also helps you find shadow IT and other interesting things. But now, in order to, I'll say, appreciate the technique I'm going to share with you, we have to go over what this outside-in discovery process is as well. So, going back to the point I made about, so what if the company doesn't tell you all the seed data or the starting points to be aware of? That could include not only DNS namespaces, but the numbers that they have registered on the internet, right? There's other things that companies register to have presence or resources on the internet. But you can't rely on them to give you all of this information. Unfortunately, the larger the company gets, the more spread out this can be. No one person seems to have complete visibility on this. Again, unfortunately, you would hope someone would, but typically they don't. But if you're offering services to, if you're basically telling these companies, we know more about you than you know about yourself, and we're going to give you better visibility on your exposure, well, then you better be able to find these things even if they don't tell you where they are, right? So a lot of the world is still based around the legal entity as the identifier for anything that moves money, essentially, right? So, and that's usually what's being used to register these resources on the internet. So if we want to be able to say, well, we're working with this company, or this company is the target of what we're doing, you need to be able to go from that to the legal entities that it has, and then look for the registrations that it's made on the internet. This is a difficult process. Again, something that only a handful of companies do this effectively, especially in the world of information security. But it's not as hard as some people think, or it can be done if you just know where to go get the right information and you know how to do the right searches for this. So, to move this along, I guess, if you can go from the legal entities to the things you're used to thinking about, such as who is records, RDAP information, basically namespaces and IP addresses, that's what the outside in refers to. It's outside as in we're looking at organizations, and now we're coming into the internet with presence, let's call it. But hopefully a more complete picture of what that presence is than maybe even the organization has or understands of itself. This way, we're going and getting our own seed data. The reason this is so important to the bottom-up discovery process is we need to know where all these networks are, where these companies are located, so we then can go to the next step. But also the reason this is important, or key to why I'm here talking about this today, is the classic bottom-up discovery process is where they say, well, we don't know where we're going to find it, so we're just going to search the whole internet. I guess I should have emphasized that earlier. That's why this is so expensive. That's why this is so noisy, is because it relies on saying, we're going to search every publicly reachable IP address on the internet and then see if what we find falls within scope of what we're interested in. That's a very expensive, noisy process to execute. But imagine if you could now change that to a more targeted or precision version of that, where we don't have to search the whole internet. We're going to search the portions of the internet that we know are registered to this organization. So we will be finding what we're looking for, but we're not going to search everything. You can now take what required this expensive infrastructure I was talking about earlier to, I can do this on my laptop. I can do this from my house if I want to, and I do, actually, and I have a lot of fun with it. But it completely changes this situation so that this nightmare people think bottom-up discovery is going to create now just became your new friend. And actually, this is becoming even easier. Perhaps some of you recently heard how more and more RIRs are properly exposing their records through RDAP. This is very important to what I'm talking about. I can't really get into all the reasons probably today, but RDAP is a big part of this, making the leap between the legal entity information and the registration information. And more of the world is, let's just say, exposing this registration information through RDAP records. It was something that was started, I want to say roughly somewhere around 10 years ago, but they gave all these RIRs quite a bit of time to make the adjustments necessary to make the records available through RDAP as opposed to, say, WHOIS. Let's see, I think I covered everything on here pretty good. Right, I guess another important point about this is a lot of this information that I've talked about so far, this can all be collected passively. What I've covered so far, like getting the information about the organizations and then getting the information about the presence on the internet, that is a passive process. We don't have to do anything that's going to draw negative attention to achieve that. Once you start sending traffic to these networks that are owned by the target organization, now you are going to draw some type of attention, right? But at least it's to the organization that's of interest, right? It's not the whole internet where you're now going to get everybody wondering why you're doing this to them and sending abuse reports, which is going to make your life difficult. All right, keep this going. Right, so I go over some of the tools that maybe you've already heard of where they try to do this internet-wide scanning and things like that. If you've ever really used these, I think what you'll find is they claim they can do this pretty quick, and depending on how you're using them, maybe you can, but you can also find yourself running these in such a way that they can take a long time. It just depends on how much of the, like how many ports are you actually looking to scan across the entire internet. If it's one, well, maybe that's not going to take too long, but you do this for all the ports, you could find this taking days, if maybe longer, to complete. But if you suddenly could do this kind of scanning and take it down to, we're only dealing with a handful of networks here, this can be done in minutes, right? So it's a night and day situation. And it makes perfect sense, right? It's because we're narrowing it down like I have on the second bullet here. It's precision targeting for this activity. So what does this look like in a workflow kind of situation? So we have to start with something, right? We at least have to know, well, what is the name of this organization that we're interested in, or what's their primary domain name, that they're using, where you'll find their their website that they want everyone going to. Things like that, like the most basic information. As long as we have that, we have a starting point most likely to get this going, because the next thing we need, and in some ways this can be a weak spot in this process, is we have to be able to go from what I just said to a corporate name. And the reason this can be difficult actually is, let me give you an example. I teach at Utica University. I teach attack surface management. They're a perfect example of this problem, which is they present themselves as Utica University. But if you go look up these registrations, I think it's two out of 3 of the registrations are under the name Utica College, because that's what they were once called, and it's what the name of the legal entity is that owns these things. That's not how they present themselves. They want to be presented as Utica University. But they're just a small organization where this is, one inconsistency. But imagine now you're talking about a large organization. They could have several name changes that they've gone through throughout the years. All these resources could be under different names that they've had throughout those years. And Utica University exists in one jurisdiction in the world, right? Or maybe two, I guess. I think it's New York and Florida. But these other companies could be all over the globe, right? In handful, 10 or more of these jurisdictions, each one requiring another registration of a legal entity, which also could have name changes that it's had and things like that. So there's a lot of data to keep track of here, but you have to be able to start with at least one of these legal entity names. That's the point here. That's the connector or data point. That's going to take us from, we started with the internet. How do we get out, right? Going back to my outside in approach here. How do we get out first to then find more of the enterprise we're dealing with? Because actually, once you can get out to one of these legal entities, it's not that difficult to find all the other ones. You can find the family, so to speak. It's like a tree. They're all connected together, and there's data sources that make this easy to do. But you need that first leap out to something that is actually theirs. Then you can find all these organizations, which is the stage here, I think, where I said, all right, so we say obtain the legal entity IDs for all the resource owners. That's the part where we get all the presence across all jurisdictions and things like that. Then we can come back in using RDAP to say, now tell me what each of these legal entities has registered. And we get that information. And now it's just the game we're all used to playing. Now we have, I'll call it a set of CIDRs or network ranges or net blocks, whatever you want to call it. And we can say, so how do we want to sweep these or scan these to find what we're looking for? There's a couple methods for how you can do this, which there's been other talks on this. I don't really need to go into too much detail, but let's just say you don't necessarily need to check every single IP address in your sweeping if you want to speed this up. And if you find something while you're doing this, and then you look around it, so to speak, you tend to find all the rest of the assets. It's much faster this way. We've been doing this with the Amass project for years. Some of the volunteers have called this our bombing method, where we just drop the bombs every 16 IPs or so. Eventually you're going to hit something, and then you say, oh, we'll keep bombing around that, and we keep looking. And we tend to find everything that's of interest. Once you find things, there's the question of what are you going to do to it to pull the data off of it that then brings it, I'll call it, back to what we're interested in, validates that this is in scope of what we're interested in. So I'm going to go over these a little bit or give you some ideas about, so how have we done this so that all of this workflow is doable, as I said earlier, from your laptop and from data sources that any of you could go get, or at least your employers could, regardless of what infrastructure you're launching it from. So this jump I was talking about to get outside, one really handy place to do this from is if your organization you're dealing with has TLS certificates that are OV or EV level, which means they've been verified by the company that signed for these. They're supposed to have done a certain amount of validation or work to know who they're really signing this for. So if it's of these two levels, the official organizational name or the legal entity name will be on the certificate under the organization. That might be all you get. EV certificates tend to also have, I'll call it, a portion of the organization's either legal address or headquarter address or street address, right? It won't usually have the whole thing. It will only have, say, the city name or something like that. But it's still helpful when you're trying to make the connection I'm talking about here. There's a couple other places I have listed here. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, where you can also pull this legal name. Like, for instance, you could go to the bottom, you could go to the footer of their website or web pages, and sometimes the company name is right there. But you got to be careful. I've seen so many examples where the company name that's in the footer, going back to my point earlier, is not the actual legal entity name. Like an example, I was recently looking at Chubb Corporation, big, huge insurance company, right? And Chubb Corporation is not the legal entity name that their resources are registered under. It's the company name they want you to think of in your head when it's the brand name. But they have all these other names that they've registered the resources under. So, perfect example, I would say. And it's kind of a nightmare. They've been acquired many times. They've gone through many name changes. So this is the situation I was talking about earlier. So you have to be careful when you're doing this. You have to look in many places, and you have to, you're kind of on this wild search trying to find who is this that we're dealing with. Once you, like I said, you have something to grab onto, you've got an actual legal entity name in your hand. There's some organizations that provide data about legal entities. Some are free, some are not. And as you can imagine, like many things in life, you get what you pay for. So I'll be talking about 2 out of the 3 that I'm aware of that work pretty good. But I have them listed here on the 4th bullet. It's Gleef and Open Corporates. Anybody in here, by the way, real quick, ever used any of these organizations for what I'm talking about? Oh, good. So see, that alone, I would say, makes this talk worth listening to. You should definitely check these organizations out. Both of them try to provide transparency of corporate information to everybody. It's to take this problem we've had for, I think it's like 200 years, where we're keeping track of this information from separately with every country that you go to, or in the US, it could be every state that you go to, and making it easy for you to just look this up and see the whole story, so to speak, of where has this company registered itself, what does it call itself, where has it claimed to be located as far as, like I said, headquarters address, legal address. I talked briefly about each one of these. If I'm going to speed this up, what I would say is think of Gleef as this is the project that's attempting to do this with no cost to the community. It's trying to just make this completely transparent to everyone. It's working, but the only real motivator, I think, that's causing companies to get their information to Gleef is that certain electronic payment mechanisms out there require that they have a Gleef record in order for them to participate in these things. So companies that are impacted by that will have Gleef records, but Gleef doesn't have the funding to go pursue this information or go find it. It's more like the company has to come provide it, and it still, as you can imagine, leaves the possibility that not all the information will be provided, maybe only the minimum information so they get the record. Or in this case, the record that they're looking for is the LEI, the legal entity identifier, which is what they need in order to participate in these payment methods. Now, on the other side or the other way to look at that, Open Corporates is a company that you have to have a subscription to. It's not free. But they're using the revenue they're making to go get this information. So regardless of whether the company wants them to have it or not, they're going and getting it. So they have more coverage than Gleef does. So you just have to decide when you're doing this how important it is to you that you're getting all this information. I do know of one other company that does this and argues that it has even superior coverage to open corporates. I haven't been able to validate this myself yet, so I have not included it into the presentation. But there is one other competitor, I would say, that has, it would appear, excellent coverage of this data. I'm going to skip this. You can always look at it afterwards, but this goes into detail of what exactly are you going to do with these data sources in order to get the tree I was talking about earlier that gives you the more complete picture of all the, for instance, let's say the organization you're working with or targeting has subsidiaries, right? Like child companies. You're going to want to know that. I mean, those relationships create interesting situations in the world of IT where, you know, the company says, well, we're acquiring you, you're going to be a subsidiary to us, but we're no longer going to let you have your own IT department, you're going to use our IT department. Or, you know, so now there's overlap in resources and the usage of the resources and things like that. And you're going to want to have that visibility in order to paint a complete picture of where this company is exposing themselves on the internet. So this process will give you that information or make it easy for you to find things that cross these corporate boundaries, I'll call it. Once you've got that tree created, you have the enterprise like mapped out, so to speak, in the legal sense. Like I said earlier, you can now take this back to the RDAP information. RDAP allows you to search on legal entity names. This is extremely important. If this wasn't the case, this would be probably not a very effective process. But you can look up these the registration information using the legal entity names. And it works quite well. I mean, there is a little bit of playing with the search, you know, massaging your searches to make sure you're getting all the information, but it's quite doable. Also, I would say if some of you use Whois on a regular basis for part of your job, but you've never touched RDAP, I would say, well, that's another thing to take away from this talk. Go start playing with RDAP. You're going to love it. It has so much more information in it than Whois does. It's a wealth of information that you're going to want to have at your disposal. So that alone would be a takeaway from this talk if you are not already familiar with registration data access protocol. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now because I have to, soon I'm going to be getting told I have to hurry up. If you want to try out what I'm talking about or try this search and you just want to be able to do it with something you're used to using like curl, this is one way that you can just put your query, you know, onto the command line, and in this case, we're looking up Salesforce.com. There's other tooling out there, like for instance, RDAP has free tooling available on GitHub, where it pretty much does this for you, and you can just give it the name on the command line. So there's easier ways to do this, but I figured instead of saying you have to go get some tool to try this, feel free to just try it with curl. And the only reason you even need that actually is because you do need these headers set up appropriately if you want this request to go through. If you just put that last URL into your browser, I don't think you're going to get what I want you to see. But if you do this, what you should get back is JSON that has all of the information I'm talking about. It's very parsable and usable, and much easier than Whois. One thing that's interesting about RDAP is, in addition to the actual resource and the information about, say, the owner, if I'm a company and I'm registering this, I could put as many people in here as I want that are employees that are involved with managing this resource. Some companies are quite open about this information. It's interesting, and have emails and phone numbers and all sorts of interesting things, street addresses that are in these entities that are part of RDEP. I would say when you're looking up this information with RDEP, take the time to say, well, I just want to see all these entities that are associated with the organization. And you might be surprised by what kind of information is just laying around in there for you to use, which perhaps you don't care, say, about these individuals that are associated with this, but the place where they work, the email addresses, the phone numbers, all of this can be very useful when you're painting a more complete picture of where are these companies, what naming conventions are they using, things like that. So definitely worth taking a more thorough look at all the entries they have in RDEP. And let's see. I guess I would warn, take a little while when you're learning RDEP to see how they connect these various resources and entities and things like that. RDEP has handles, and sometimes the results you get back from these queries only give you very minimal information that then include the RDEP handle, which then you have to make a separate query saying, I want the information associated with this handle to get all the juicy information. Just be prepared for this multi-step process where initially you're just getting, here's what you're going to want to look at, and now I'm going to go pull each thing individually if you want to get all the interesting information. Because otherwise you could get the results and say, well, I don't see the connection. I'm not seeing what I came here to see. But it's just that it's a multi-step process. And that's what I mean here on the last bullet when I say each entity query will include related entities. Keep searching those related entities to find what you're really looking for. All right, quickly, we'll go over what I talked about earlier. Once you have these resources in your hand, you have the net blocks, you have the ASs, the things that you could, like I said, it could be a single IP address. I don't know how many of you have seen this happen, but if you're a company and you have a relationship with an ISP, since you have a business account with them, sometimes they will register the IP for you without telling you even, right? Like it could just happen and you don't realize it. But it's so convenient for people like me. Because you probably don't even think that this, say, visibility has been created on you. But it makes it possible for me to just find it now with this process because I'm looking at it, again, from the outside in. I'm looking at the org I'm interested in, and now it's bringing all this information to my attention that maybe you thought you were being careful about and not exposing to the world, right? But I would say watch carefully. Go check these relationships you have with these various ISPs and things like that and what they're doing for you. We got a question?
Yeah, how much does the system find false positives from that kind of outcome?
Well, I would say from everything I've been talking about, be prepared for the possibility that RDEP can have stale information, right? I could spend time talking about this that I don't have because I was just warned I have 10 minutes. Yeah, actually, so does the legal entity information, right? Like once a company goes and gets a LEI, there's nothing requiring them to keep this information fresh, right? They could go get the LEI, now be able to participate in the financial transactions and say, we don't have to worry about that, it's working. And they could leave this information stale for 2 years. I've seen entries with Gleef where it's in there, but it will say, and it no longer the record no longer conforms to the standard, right? It's still working. It's still an effective LEI or active LEI, but the companies have left this information there so long that they don't even seem to realize that they're not meeting the current requirements for the record. So you definitely need to be thinking about this. There are dates on these things that, unfortunately, they're not perfect. They don't make it super easy to say, oh, that's obviously 2 old for us to use it or be able to rely on it. But you can make sense of it or get an idea of, is this likely to be stale or not? But it's a separate problem, I would say. But good question. And in case you couldn't hear him, I think what you said was, well, you pretty much said what's the likelihood that this information could be, well, you said false positives, right? Like if we're going to get...
You get an IP address that's registered to you, you leave that provider provides that IP address to another customer, but doesn't update that data, and then suddenly the system identifies a resource that isn't your resource, but it shows you vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would depend on the ISP, right? Like how good is their bookkeeping on this? And also, if you try to put in a second customer on the same IP, I don't think that's going to work too well with RDAP, or it will easily be noticeable with RDAP. But I don't think they allow the same resource to be registered twice, right?
They don't do good records,
Right.
of identifying.
So I think part of your concern, I would say, you don't have to worry about, but there is the possibility, right, that there could just be sloppiness going on that could cause some of this. All right, wrapping this up though. Once we have these resources in our hand, there's some things we could do to speed up the sweeping or the scanning. For instance, if you end up finding a /16 site or block or net block, you're probably not going to want to actually check every single IP address. I mean, you could suit yourself if you want, but I would say start by sweeping, which is, where I would say you're only looking at some of them. You're sweeping and sampling, that's what I call it. We're just getting samples every so often. And when we find, when one of them hits, when we find something, people tend to put resources in the same area on a network. So if you find something and then you say, now look at all the addresses in both directions, 200 IPs away, you tend to find a lot of things. And if you find more, keep going, right? Like until now it looks like you're not finding anything anymore. That process is much faster and tends to find everything anyway. So keep that in mind, because you're going to find large networks and you're not going to want that to necessarily slow down your discovery process. I kind of mentioned this before, but also now assume our sampling finds some, or we find something on one of these networks. Eventually you want to be able to say, and we have a way to validate that this belongs to who we originally thought it belonged to, or it's within scope of whatever we're trying to do. You could find yourself never getting a name on this, right? That's just a possibility. Not every asset on the internet has a public name associated with it. But there are other things we can use for identification of these things. The IP address obviously being one, but unfortunately IP addresses can be reassigned. There's no guarantee, of course, that an IP will be permanently associated with an asset or a system on the internet. So there's some other things you can try to do that are low-hanging fruit, I would call it. Like try doing reverse DNS and see what that gets you. Try pulling a TLS certificate off of it, which could give you names for or at least the name space that this asset is considered to be in. So again, you can say, well, at least we know this is the organization we're interested in. Try doing banner grabbing. Lots of things will return organizational names or the DNS name that's associated with it. So it could be the answer to your question. And if it has a web interface, which so many things now do content discovery on it. And again, you're likely to find evidence of who does this belong to. So these are easy things, I would say, to try to make this full circle from where you started. But like I said down here, don't be surprised if you just don't end up finding something and you just have to say, well, we believe it belongs to the target organization. So maybe to wrap this up or make it kind of interesting, although I don't know how well you can see this. So this is a visualization that came from the Amass project from, actually, I think it is Utica University, which I was talking about earlier. If you can see it from where you're sitting, the blue dots or nodes and the, like, I guess it would be orange nodes that are connected to them, I would kind of describe it as these flower-looking things in the graph, right? These are your organizations. These are the things that have been put into this visualization or into the graph because of the outside-in process that I was discovering or explaining earlier. It's those trees of these enterprises that I referred to. And the orange nodes are all the different identifiers that we were able to find associated with these organizations, like different ways that they were identifiable. So it's that information that, and then tying, the yellow nodes are the registration information. So you can see how these blue nodes are connected to the yellow nodes. That's the registration information that then takes us back into the internet. So if you want to see what does this look like when this is actually being done and it's brought into the bigger picture, there's your like taste, I would call, of it. You can see a good number of examples, if you can see this image, of how those yellow registration records are then connecting them back towards the middle, where you have the light orange IP addresses and the green DNS names. So it's bringing us back to the internet infrastructure, which you could say is probably what we're interested in here for the bottom-up discovery. And that's it, which I think might put me, is I perfectly on time, or?
You got about a minute and a half if we have any questions for Jeff this morning.
So thank you for the introduction to RDAP. I hadn't seen that before. Who is being deprecated?
I certainly hope so. I believe that's the intention, is it's going out. I mean, I don't know if anyone's saying the protocol will never be supported again, but as far as for registration purpose, I mean, even domain registrars, you can usually get your information with RDAP now. Like GoDaddy supports RDAP servers as in addition to Whois servers. So it definitely looks like it's on its way out, or Whois is. Again, I'll try to repeat the question real quick. His question was, is this replacing Whois, right? And is Whois going out? I would say yes, but I don't know if I've seen an official announcement saying we're never going to use Whois again. You know, it's phasing out.
Question over here.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Over here. I'm supposed to use the mic.
You've done all the hard, cool work. Is that data available to anybody outside of whoever you have done this work for?
the data available?
I'm assuming you're doing all these things that you've demonstrated today. Are you amassing that into a database of information that can be shared so that we don't have to go out and do the same things?
I wish I could just have all of it on a database. The project, the Amass project, so the question, if you can't hear him, is he says, I did all the hard work and now is this easily available to all of you? We've done the work of creating the Amass project and the framework that makes it possible, if you have the right data sources, to pull this data in for your own use, just like I did to create that visualization that we were just looking at. But you have to go get it, right? I don't just have it sitting somewhere. Amass pulls this data from many different data sources and then puts it all together so that it paints the picture for you. So you can go grab the project for free. It's an open source project, and then enjoy it like everyone else.
All right, we have one last question over here on the side, and then we'll wrap up.
So I wanted to check out the RDAP as somebody who does use Whois very regularly. And I decided to search one of my own personal domains on there. And it comes up showing, as I had requested from my registrar, it's all redacted. So Is that something that you come across when you're doing this from a corporate standpoint, the redacted information, and like how do you kind of navigate that with RDAP as well?
Yeah, so I mean, none of this is going to change the fact that people want privacy rights, right? But generally, the advice that corporations are given is that if you are a legit corporation that is doing honest business, you have nothing to be hiding, right? So maybe small companies are redacting the information because they're afraid of people getting the information, but usually a more larger, mature organization will have some type of legitimate information in these records to show, well, like I said, legitimacy, right? Like, or the fact that they're clean and doing things the way they should be. So yes, we of course come across redacted information, but I would say it's oftentimes for not very interesting targets, or you know, it's the real targets have presence in these databases is what I tend to find.
With that, guys, we are out of time. I do want to thank Jeff today for his talk. We have a certificate for you today and a gift card for presenting
Thank
here
you.
at RSS. Please go out and visit rochestersecurity.org. Click on the submit a survey thing. This helps us make sure we have good speakers in the future. Thank you guys so much.
If you'd like to speak about this, feel free to meet me outside. We can continue the conversation if you like. Thank you.